Okay, we're gonna start with Back to Black because I actually have the least to say about this one. There are two ways to make a good biopic. First, the person you're making the movie about can have done something very cool or interesting in their life. Or second, the person themselves can be very flawed and paradoxical, and the movie can be about sort of them trying to reconcile the different parts of themselves. Ideally, a good biopic will do both of those things. This movie, unfortunately, does neither of those things. I know nothing about Amy Winehouse. I'm not like an Amy Winehouse fan. I literally had never heard an Amy Winehouse song until last night, so I'm definitely not the target audience for this movie. But with that said, I felt like nothing really happened in this movie, and I felt like Amy herself was not particularly likable. She was just kind of mean and dumb. And I feel like the movie didn't answer any of the questions I actually had about her life. Like, the beginning of this movie is setting up all this interesting stuff about her drug addiction and her sort of doomed relationship with her husband. And then her husband divorces her and she goes to rehab and she gets clean and things are looking better for her. And then the movie just cuts to black and the captions are like, oh, and she died after that. I've been reading a lot of disappointed reviews for this movie from actual Amy Winehouse fans, so I think you guys might have missed your actual target audience too. 3.5 out of 10. Ooh, let's do If next. If was kind of confusing. So this girl goes to live with her grandma because her dad is in the hospital getting heart surgery, and she's doing that, and she finds a 3D animated woman running around out there, and she follows this 3D animated woman back to a secondary location where she does not get abducted, but instead discovers that all imaginary friends are actually real, and that when kids stop believing in them, they become invisible to the kids. And I don't really know what her personal stake in this whole thing is, but she's like, well, you guys obviously need to find new kids, so I will help you find new kids. And then straight up, I don't know what happened after that. The stakes of this movie at the beginning seem to be, oh, we gotta find new kids for all these imaginary friends. And then they don't find a new kid for, like, any of them, actually, but somehow everything's still okay. It's not really clear why the imaginary friends need new kids, other than they're just sad because they don't have kids anymore. Okay, but the twist at the end of this movie is actually pretty sick. So Ryan Reynolds' character, Calvin, turns out to actually be this little girl's imaginary friend that she forgot about after her mom died. I think it was actually pretty foreshadowed throughout the beginning of this movie, and I just didn't realize it. So that was actually a really cool twist. It is a little bit weird, and I do have a couple questions about that whole thing, because Calvin is the only human imaginary friend that we see. Every other kid's imaginary friend is like some sort of otherworldly creature, but this girl's imaginary friend is human. I just think it's really weird that we don't see one other human imaginary friend in this whole movie. Also, they say that Calvin used to be a clown, and the movie's interpretation of that is, oh, it used to be his job to make you smile. But unfortunately, the cultural perception of clowns is a lot scarier than that. So when they said, oh, this guy used to be a clown, I was like, oh God, get him away from that girl, he's gonna eat her. A lot of the imaginary friends themselves are really funny. My favorite one was this guy, this like noir detective Tracer Bullet-esque character who keeps popping in out of nowhere and like grabbing people by the collar and interrogating them. I don't know what fucking psychopath had that for their imaginary friend, but there's also an imaginary friend that's just a glass of water with an ice cube in it, and you find out that the kid created him because it was just a hot day in Arizona and the kid was thirsty, so he created an entire being about it. The girl who plays the main character kept clipping the microphone. Like, all of her lines sound so crunchy. I don't know what, it's not her fault, but it sounded terrible. She's like, we gotta go find these ifs. 4 out of 10. Okay. I saw The TV Glow. This was one of my most anticipated movies for this month, at the very least, if not this entire year. It's very much an indie horror movie. It's very abstract. The pacing is really weird. There are scenes that go on for way too long, but it actually managed to establish a really creepy atmosphere and deliver a plot that I found extremely interesting. Okay, so there's this kid, Owen, and he meets this girl, Maddie, and Maddie is a fan of this show called The Pink Opaque. The movie takes place over the course of Owen's entire life as he slowly gets more and more obsessed with the show. The Pink Opaque seems to be this sort of Buffy the Vampire Slayer-esque show about these two girls with like a psychic connection just fighting monsters. It seems like pretty benign, but then every clip we see of it, there's something really unnerving about it. The monsters on the show are extremely unsettling. It's very clear from the beginning that there is more than meets the eye to this whole show. Owen has kind of a troubled home life. It seems like he doesn't feel comfortable in his own body, and his parents are not really like helping that situation. Maddie also has a troubled home life, and at one point Maddie decides that she's going to run away and she wants Owen to come with her. Owen decides not to run away with her. He's about to, but he freaks out and gets really scared and decides not to. And then Maddie just disappears, and all they find of her is just her TV set burning in her backyard. So the movie then cuts to about a decade later when Owen and Maddie finally meet up again. Maddie starts asking Owen about what he remembers about the Pink Opaque and watching it when they were kids. And it seems like now, when Owen is trying to remember it, those memories have gotten fuzzier. And instead of sitting there together watching the show, he remembers those experiences as sort of him actually being able to fully express himself the way he wants to. There are a lot of shots of him like trying on dresses next to Maddie, and it seems like that's a part of him that he really wants to be able to express. And for some reason, his memories of the show are now sort of intermixed with those memories. It's really weird. Maddie reveals that the two of them are actually the two girl protagonists from the Pink Opaque, and that they've actually been buried alive by the main villain of that series and are slowly suffocating to death while hallucinating their current reality. And time is passing much, I guess, slower in the current reality than it is outside. So that decade that Maddie has been gone is literally just been a couple seconds while Owen is still suffocating. So she tells him the only way that they can get back to the world of the show is to bury themselves alive in the current reality and wake back up in the Pink Opaque. And they're going to do it. They're both going to bury themselves alive, but Owen freaks out again, and he runs away, and he talks about how he's basically waiting for Maddie to come and force him to bury himself and wake back up in the Pink Opaque, but she never comes back, and he never sees her again. The movie never confirms outright whether or not Maddie's story, her interpretation of what's going on and what's happening to them, if that is true, but it strongly suggests that it is true. They throw in this little detail at the beginning where Owen has asthma. He has to use an inhaler, and in the last segment of the movie, which takes place 20 years after Owen last sees Maddie, he's working at this arcade, and his asthma has gotten significantly worse, like asthma does sometimes, or like he is still suffocating in the Pink Opaque and is now finally running out of air. And so he's got this really unsettling, like, labored breathing thing that he's doing. And then they're throwing like a birthday party for these kids at this arcade, and he just fucking freaks out. He starts screaming for help, screaming that he's dying, he's buried, and someone needs to come dig him up. And the audience, the other people at this party, are just standing there in silence. Not silence like they're reacting to him. They're just like frozen. It's really unsettling. I think the suggestion there is that all these people are just part of this constructed reality that he's in. So then he goes to the bathroom and cuts open his chest and pulls it apart, and inside of him is a flickering TV screen playing footage of the Pink Opaque. And this seems to relieve him, but then the final shot of the movie is him like stumbling around the arcade, apologizing to everybody for the outburst that he just had, but like nobody's even reacting to him. It's like they don't even see him. It's like he doesn't even exist. I feel like the real brilliance of this movie is the way that it's actually able to create some ambiguity about whether Maddie's interpretation is correct or if both of them are just extremely repressed and disturbed and looking for any kind of escape, basically. Especially because there's a scene near the end where Owen is now an adult and he finds the Pink Opaque available for streaming, and he watches the show again, and it's completely different. It's not scary at all. It's like really cheap and like low quality. And he's like confused because he felt like the show was an entirely different thing as a kid. Frankly, I don't understand that part, and I need to think more about that. But there's something there. The long and short of it is this movie is able to set up this really interesting, almost chicken and egg scenario where you're like, does Owen feel so repressed because he is a character from the Pink Opaque trapped in this world, or does he identify so strongly with the Pink Opaque because he is so repressed? It's not a perfect movie. There are 2 full music videos in this movie, like an entire song plays while nothing else happens, which is fine, I guess, if you like the music that's in the movie. One of the songs was a lady screaming at the top of her lungs into my ears at movie theater volume, so that one wasn't great. But if you come at me with some of the scary shit that this movie comes at you with, I'll forgive a lot of stuff. This movie really unnerved me. There is this scene where you finally get to see Mr. Melancholy, who is like the main villain of the Pink Opaque. He's this like distorted, disfigured moon guy with like a baby's face. It's fucking terrifying. The reason I was so excited to watch this movie is because it looked like it was going to lean really hard into analog horror, which is something that I've just been getting more and more interested in over the past couple years. There have been a lot of movies that have tried to incorporate analog horror into what would otherwise be like a traditional horror movie, and I can't say that there's been one yet that really works like this one does. I think it's because the analog medium, the TV show itself, is such a central part to the story, so you get to show a lot of clips from the TV show and actually use some of those analog horror tricks in ways that feel very natural to the story. I don't think this movie had a single jump scare in it, and it was way creepier than any of the mainstream horror I've seen this year. Very cool to see analog horror actually work in a full-length feature, because the closest that I think they've come before was Skinamarink, and that was a deeply flawed movie. 7.5 out of 10. Very good movie. Alright, that was all the movies I saw this week, so I will see you next time, where we will be watching The Strangers Chapter 1, which looks like it will be terrible, Furiosa, which I'm very excited for, and the Garfield movie, which I have no idea what that's going to be like. Very exciting. See you then.